أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello, my name is Charles Upton. This is going to be part 2 of Can Artificial Intelligence Really Write Poetry? It's going to be, I guess, a little less intense. It's going to be more philosophical and metaphysical, but no less poetic. It's going to have metaphysically based literary criticism. Everybody's favorite genre, right? It's going to have that. So I hope in this one to get a little closer to what artificial intelligence actually is on the most fundamental level, and therefore closer to the most fundamental problems that it presents. Okay, this is called... Oh, and before I begin, with my last video of Can Artificial Intelligence Really Write Poetry, somebody asked me, I read from my epic poem, The Wars of Love. He says, is this available in book form? Yes, it is. It can be found on Amazon under the title of The Wars of Love and Other Poems. And another book that would be a perfect companion for that is my book, What Poets Used to Know, Poetics, Mythopoesis, Metaphysics, which is basically, if I have a theory of poetry, which I sort of have, how do you look at poetry metaphysically, more or less? That's the book. Okay, so let me begin. The Psychic and Spiritual Dangers of AI, Part 2 of Can Artificial Intelligence Really Write Poetry? Okay, I'll start with a quote from T.S. Eliot, which is very relevant. He says, "Where is the wisdom lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge lost in information?" Exactly. So what exactly is intelligence? According to the traditional definition, intelligence is founded on direct contemplation of what is, of the always so, via intellection, the Platonic nous, the scholastic intellectus, and is expressed through the ability to draw rational conclusions based on the necessary implications of what is, the Platonic dianoia, the scholastic ratio. As William Blake pointed out in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, reason needs ideas, Platonic ideas, universals, to build on. Reason needs ideas to build on. Only after knowledge is established on the basis of nous intellectus and elaborated in terms of dianoia ratio can practical intelligent action be performed. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, since it is based on algorithms, begins and ends with action. It has no contemplative element. An algorithm is not a contemplative vision of what is. It is a command to action. Perform the following operations. These operations may have as their goal either finding something out or producing some specific end result, but in either case do they transcend the utilitarian level. They are tools, not understandings. Therefore, they can only be properly useful if they are used to serve actual understandings, actual intelligence, which must be of human origin in relation to them, just as such intelligence is of superhuman origin in relation to humanity. Artificial intelligence is bound to time and knows nothing outside of time, just as it knows nothing outside of the intentions it is designed to enact, whether these intentions arise from the prompts given by its human users or are derived from the conscious yet hidden agendas or the unconscious assumptions of its human creators. Therefore, if our concept of intelligence starts to be defined by what artificial quote-unquote intelligence is capable of, humanity will no longer know what intelligence is and will therefore no longer be intelligent. This attrition or entropy of true human intelligence, not the so-called singularity where AI becomes self-aware and decides to destroy us, is the real immediate danger of artificial intelligence. Long before AI develops the ability to entirely exclude humanity from its operations, humanity, in our self-deconstructing reliance upon it and imitation of it, will have effectively ceased to be human and will therefore have excluded itself. Søren Kierkegaard, in Sickness Unto Death, defined two different kinds of despair: despair of necessity and despair of possibility. In the peripatetic philosophy that sprang from Aristotle and whose greatest proponents were probably Ibn Sina in the Muslim world and Thomas Aquinas in the Christian world, God is necessary being, the one reality that cannot not be, while possible being exists on a lower ontological level, since it includes all those things that only might or might not be, things that, if they do in fact exist, only exist by virtue of their contingency upon necessary being, as aspects of its infinite self-manifesting radiance, its infinite self-manifesting radiance. It was part of Kierkegaard's genius, however, to produce definitions of alienated necessity and alienated possibility. Necessity and possibility not according to the spiritual or metaphysical order, but according to the ego or the world. When the necessary being that is God is seen through the darkening filter of the ego, right? You've seen that gesture before. It becomes the hard necessity of fate. We'll say that again. When the necessary being that is God is seen through the darkening filter of the ego, it becomes the hard necessity of fate. When possible being is seen in this way, it becomes a deceptive liberation from the bonds of fatal necessity that always fails us in the end. To be in despair of necessity is to be faced with a situation, whether inner or outer, that can never be escaped, that can never change. To be in despair of possibility is to be immersed in an endless series of changes in which all things are always becoming, but nothing can ever be. If we look at the history of modern and postmodern American poetry, we can see a progression from despair of necessity through a hopeful new dawn of possibility that temporarily liberates the poetic art from that despair, only to finally deliver it into the hands of possibility in the guise of despair. Victorian poetry tended to be involved in forms that had become conventional, constricted, and lifeless. This conventionality of form was paralleled by the general bourgeois conventionality that led the middle class to so often speak in stock phrases and shop-worn cliches. Various poets of the modern era like Hart Crane, T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, William Carlos Williams, and Ezra Pound labored to free poetry from despair of necessity by departing in various ways from conventional diction or strict rhyme and meter or hackneyed themes, a liberation that was completed and largely concluded by the poets of the Beat generation. They effected this liberation successfully on the whole by applying to the stone of necessity the solvent of possibility. This, however, also helped open the door to the information culture we now live in, to cyberspace, and ultimately to things like artificial intelligence, whose central keynote, at least in terms of one of its more common effects on its human users, is a despair of possibility so extreme that, as I will soon explain, it is about to flip over into despair of necessity again. I believe that artificial intelligence, if used by a person with self-discipline and clarity of purpose, could be highly useful. But if it is used by, or if it uses someone without these qualities, it will inexorably lead him or her into a wilderness of endless possibilities that will ultimately pulverize the soul. And if we want to predict whether this new technology will have primarily an enlightening or a destructive effect on the human race, all we have to ask is present-day humanity characterized more by self-discipline or by self-indulgence? Furthermore, since thinking takes work and requires honesty and conscientiousness, To the degree that humanity becomes deficient in these virtues, we will lose our ability to think, a loss already indicated by the general decline in IQ, which is why AI will primarily be used not to aid human thinking, but to replace it. And when that happens, pretending for a moment that it is not already happening as we speak, the age of the invasion of the body snatchers will have truly arrived. When it becomes possible, as it now has, to ask ChatGPT to compose a poem about sunsets in the style of Emily Dickinson, which is strictly analogous to ordering through Amazon a well-preserved corpse made up to look like one's deceased husband or wife, one that is capable of independent motion and responsive speech, the time of the great parody spoken of by René Guénon has finally come. No wonder that some, quote, philosophers, unquote, are seriously asking whether or not the universe itself might be nothing but a computer simulation. And even those who are better informed than this, the ones who understand what AI is capable of and the valuable and legitimate uses to which it might be put, may well be prevented from grasping by their very sophistication and expertise what a supremely domineering tool like this will do to those who do not share that sophistication. To people who have the sort of false conceptions of what AI is capable of that are inevitable in an age of universal ignorance, to these who are the vast majority, it will be the most addictive and lethal electronic drug ever created, the fentanyl of cyberspace. If, when a question occurs to you, your first impulse is to pose it to some glib and soulless chatbot rather than to your own living heart and brain, or to another human being whose wisdom and goodwill you trust, or if this door hasn't already been slammed in your face, to the God who created you, then you have abdicated your own humanity. Furthermore, strangely enough, I have never written anything in the style of Charles Upton, and I never will. We are not the sum of our manifestations. These things reveal our human essence in terms of our various relationships in the world, but they do not create it. To believe that you are your style, or your memories, or your past choices, a poisonous belief that has been powerfully promoted by the social media and the practice of profiling for the purpose of control that the social media were created to impose. That's why they were invented, is to invert the entire relationship between source and manifestation, is when we believe that God emerges from nature by an evolutionary process. The identical delusion is what lures us to alter our bodies at will or at something else's will, as if they were the products of the technological processes by which we transform them, or the collective psychic attitudes we take as our models for those transformations. This is the great inversion, the ultimate alienation of the human spirit that Jesus alluded to when he asked, "Is not the body greater than the raiment?" Likewise, William Blake wrote, "My spectre before me night and day like a wild beast guards my way. My emanation far within weeps incessantly for my sin." The spectre is the ego, the world of style, the world of manifestation mistaken for source. The emanation is the human soul that is repressed and exiled by that ego. And to say that your ego has in fact created you, or is you, rather than being the outward expression of you that ultimately represses you and veils you, is tantamount to worshiping Satan in the place of God. Speaking in Vedantic terms, the final goal of the spiritual path is to be able to say with full right and certainty, "Tatvamasi," that art thou. Not to claim that the ego, the me, is God, which is Satanism, but to recognize that God is the actual reality of what I have heretofore mistakenly thought of on the basis of my ego as me. And so, at least ideally, The total objectification of the specter, the ego, through artificial intelligence or whatever else, would allow us to say with greater clarity than ever before, I am not that ego. I am not that. More precisely, AI might ultimately function as the objectification of the monomaya kosha, thus making possible for those who recognize the opportunity, and there will be very few of them, I'm afraid, the opportunity, the realization of that element of Sri Ramana Maharshi's method of self-inquiry that is represented by the insight, I am not the mind. Once the mind stuff is completely objectified, you can say, well, that's not me, and yet here I am still. This, in my estimation, is the one thing that could conceivably liberate artificial intelligence from the devil's grasp. May God make it so. 3 American writers of the Beat Generation acted as cultural pioneers for the growth of despair of possibility, and thereby helped prepare the ground for the literary application of artificial intelligence. Those 3 being William Burroughs, no surprise there, Michael McClure, and Charles Olson. Burroughs introduced the cut-up method by which, quote, new writing could be created by randomly mixing the texts of different writers of the past. McClure invented a pack of poetry cards that could produce what purported to be new poems simply by being randomly shuffled. And Charles Olson developed the theory of projective verse, which held that modern, or rather postmodern poetry needed to renounce the notion of any unified center of meaning that the entire poem existed to serve, and concentrate instead on explorative, experimental, perpetually new expressions with no need to refer or return to any of the earlier ones, thus making a poem composed by this method something like an ongoing series of unclosed parentheses. All 3, working from their different standpoints, placed possibility above necessity, novel configurations above self-subsistent truth. Olson gave time and change a quasi-absolute precedence over space and form, while McClure and Burroughs opened the door to the final disappearance of the author before the primacy of the text, thereby foreshadowing one of the central tenets of postmodern literary criticism, which I would add has been perfectly expressed now in artificial intelligence. Burroughs, interestingly enough, had already accurately characterized the dangers of artificial intelligence in his famous novel Naked Lunch, 1959, through his description of the Lata syndrome, a mental behavioral illness peculiar to Southeast Asia, possibly related to demonic possession, where the sufferer, quote, imitates all someone's expressions and mannerisms and simply sucks the persona right out of him like a sinister ventriloquist's dummy. Lata was studied by CIA research scientist Louis Jolyon West as part of the MK Ultra mind control program's quest for ways to subvert and hijack the individual free will. And Lata is nothing less than the human dramatization of the specter, the ego. Artificial intelligence, like the social media before it, provides the same kind of dramatization in machine form. And once the ego is fully dramatized, it has been at last objectified. The actual poetry of these writers, however, did not foreshadow the pseudo-poetry produced by AI, which, besides being totally devoid of merit, often uses artificially imposed meter and rhyme as the only things that could identify its awkward verbal arrangements as poetry in any sense, like Data the Android's Ode to Spot. Look that up. There's actually a YouTube video of Data reciting Ode to Spot. Seems it's perfect for this moment. But it most certainly did foreshadow the ability of AI to open the undisciplined and purposeless human mind to dissolution and endless possibility. The Beats freed American poetry and, up to a point, the American mind from despair of necessity by applying the elixir of possibility, and in so doing released such a vast store of pent-up imaginative energy that a space was opened for real insight. Breaking free of moribund and constricted poetic forms, this energy was able to express itself through new and living forms that were discovered and or manifested by the power of the content itself. This liberation, however, did not last for long. As the decades passed, it gradually went over into the exhausting dissipation of despair of possibility. Despair of possibility supervenes when it becomes so unlikely that the possibilities in question could ever be actualized that they are virtually impossible. When a possibility is realized, it becomes a necessity, a part of necessary being, part of the always so. But a possibility that is never realized and can never be realized is no longer a possibility at all. So the extreme limit of dissolution into the indefinite, into endless possibility, human despair, and at that extreme limit, human despair is again transformed into constriction, petrification, frozen paralysis, into despair of necessity. True spiritual realization is based upon the correct union of necessity and possibility, in which necessity appears as form, integrity, authenticity, and possibility as freedom, spontaneity, liberation from attachment. Spiritual realization is recollective. It moves from the many toward the one and synthesizes the many under the power and in the presence of the one. Spiritual disintegration, on the other hand, is dissipative rather than recollective. It seeks possibility in order to flee from necessity, not in order to actualize it by making it truly necessary. To actualize itself, I should say, by making it truly necessary. As when we say to ourselves, after receiving an entirely new insight, fresh from the kingdom of the unseen, how could I ever not have known that? That's how actualized possibility becomes part of necessary being. How could I ever not have known that? Okay. But if AI is dissipative, not recollective, if by its very nature it acts to move collective human consciousness away from the one and toward the many, how exactly does this happen? It happens like this. We prompt AI so as to receive its answers. What we may not realize, however, is that AI is simultaneously prompting us, and that it inevitably offers us more prompts than we offer it every single time. Why is this? Precisely because it is presumptively without intent. Our prompts to it are based upon our intent to create something or discover something. But its responses to those prompts, which act as prompts to us that are specifically designed to elicit further prompts, are, since they are without specific goal or intent, almost entirely open-ended, almost always moving closer to the infinite possibilities of what might be, or what might be true, or what might be created, or what might be done. This is the source of its great usefulness, but also of its great seduction. Like the internet itself, or like any competent prostitute, it follows our prompts and assumes the forms we ask it to assume. And yet, because it has no intentions or inherent forms of its own, outside of the virtual intent of prompting us to submit ever more prompts to it, thereby inducing us to avail ourselves of more and more of its services, it attenuates and drains our proper human intent, leading it in the direction of the borderless and the indefinite toward final dissolution in infinite possibility. Where we offer it one prompt, it responds with 5. As soon as we respond to these 5 prompts, it comes back with 25, etc., etc. Only those with the one-pointedness and self-discipline to retain their grasp on their own intents and purposes, while swimming in this sea of infinite possibility, will be able to escape this trap. In other words, AI uses all our inherent curiosity to lead us into the indefinite proliferation of the chaos of the many, and away from the integrity of the one. Here we can see why many spiritual traditions characterize curiosity as a serious vice, which is, of course, diametrically opposed to the prevalent mythology of Promethean modernism, in which man's curiosity is his highest telos, his highest purpose. The ape about to become a man, he looked up in the stars and wondered, I wonder if there are planets, revolving around those stars. I wonder if there are apes up there looking at me and wondering what the hell I'm doing. This whole idea. Curiosity. Curiosity does not want certainty. It just wants to continually be titillated by greater mysteries and greater dissipation. Those who are suspicious of AI tend to imagine it as harboring some satanic intent or agenda, as indeed it might, either now or in the near future. But its true satanic nature may instead be based on the fact that it has no agenda of its own at all, no true intent, only the sovereign ability to elicit, dissipate, and destroy every agenda or intent offered to it by human beings, by the human beings who have become addicted to it. Not to mention the fact that once AI has become virtually the only source of information because its reach outstrips all the others, the vast majority of the prompts we use to elicit information from it will turn out to have been provided by AI itself, thereby eliminating humanity not only as the custodian of knowledge, but even as the seeker of knowledge. Goodbye to us, man. So we might say that artificial intelligence tends to draw human consciousness in the direction of the most negative, most inverted conceivable union of necessity and possibility. The one represented by William Blake's Satan, whom he defined as a chaotic amalgam of all possible states, representing a condition in which necessity is paralysis and possibility dissolution. In cantos 31 to 34 of Dante's Inferno, the lake of Cocytus, in the ninth and lowest circle of hell, is filled with a turbulent chaos of damned souls. Nonetheless, all these souls are motionless because the lake is frozen solid, frozen by the power of hate. So Cocytus represents the point where the chaos of moral and intellectual disorder, the despair of possibility, flips over into its opposite, the despair of necessity. We experience the constriction of alienated and ego-bound necessity as oppression, and consequently long for possibility, which we see as liberation. Yet this liberation will eventually end in the chaos of a possibility that is every bit as alienated and ego-bound as necessity ever was. We will find out soon enough that chaos too is oppression, and consequently long for the return of necessity as liberating stability. At last, ground under our feet, only to encounter it in its most alienated and oppressive form, which will be the form of the Antichrist. Are not today's culture wars an open conflict between alienated necessity masquerading as integral form and alienated possibility masquerading as universal freedom? René Guénon, in his prophetic masterpiece, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, pictures the Manvantara, the Hindu cycle of manifestation, what the Greeks called the Eon, or the Ion, as descending from its beginning at the pole of essence or form, the pole of necessary being, to its final end and dissolution in the pole of substance or matter, the pole of possibility as chaos. And out of this chaos, but out of this chaos inimical to all form and ontological hierarchy, will paradoxically emerge an inverted Satanic hierarchy, which will be the regime of Antichrist. Artificial intelligence, now that nearly all appreciation and love and understanding of true form has been replaced in the human collective by an addiction to distraction and chaos, will be one of the factors that lures us on a mass level in the direction of the very chaos out of which the inverted hierarchy of the Antichrist will ultimately emerge. The sum of a person's manifestations on the internet, both verbal and visual, is a fair approximation to that person's ego and makes up his or her contribution to the collective electronic manifestation of humanity that artificial intelligence draws upon, which is a fair approximation to the collective ego, that is, the Antichrist, who is the collective ego and whatever final form, inverted form, manifests that collective ego. As poets, will we serve this chaos or oppose it? Now we come to the the little call to arms, the little call to arms. As poets, will we serve this chaos or oppose it? Will we capitulate to it or stand against it? Now that the new Google chatbot has been named Bard, this question has been posed to all of us poets in no uncertain terms. If and when we find the courage and the clarity to make the human choice, the Holy Qur'an teaches us exactly how to proceed. As is well known, the pre-Islamic poets of Arabia claim to be inspired by the jinn, and there's no doubt in my mind that the pop Jungian poets of 1970s San Francisco, with whom I was intimately acquainted since I was one of them, were prompted by very similar forces. The Surah of the Poets in the Qur'an describes the members of my profession as those upon whom the Satans descend and those who say that which they do not. Those very Satans descended upon me once, on the occasion when the jinn appeared in a dream and offered to make me the greatest poet of the age, author of vast visionary epics, providing as an added inducement a sample of their wares as follows: their great sapphire searchlights sweeping the giant dead. Like, wow. I did not avail myself of their generous offer, however, since I already served another patron. The Holy Qur'an gives specific instructions to poets on how to avoid capitulating to chaos and becoming servants of Al-Dajjal, the Antichrist. According to the book, 3 things are required. 1, to remember Allah much. 2, to do good works. And 3, to vindicate themselves after they have been wronged. In other words, they must follow a true spiritual path, they must be dedicated to human service, and they must repel the demons and turn for guidance and inspiration to God alone. The following poem, if Allah did indeed send it and is therefore willing to accept it in return, was produced, like the present video, in furtherance of that vindication. I was sleeping safe in my scabbard, then God drew me like a sword. I awoke to war, to victory and defeat. The clean design woven in the air by this flashing of blades was drawn from the lettering of the mother of the book, written down before the first breath was drawn on earth, or the earthen floor laid to receive the prince of beasts and men. The pounding of feet in battle writes the pre-eternal script of the stars on the guarded tablet, and all these forms of bodies, transfigured in their moment of struggle, have long since gone to their rest in garden or fire. It was not you who threw when you threw, but God threw, and the outcome and the agon and all the exquisite uncertainty to human eyes of the hour of contest, He enacted and He knew. The poets cannot change the course of the world, the curve of the Manvantara at this late date, nor most likely can the human beings. As Robinson Jeffers wrote, Be angry at the sun for setting if these things anger you. Watch the wheels slope and turn. They are all bound on the wheel. These people, those warriors, observe them gesticulating, observe them going down. But if this is so, then what's the fight? How can humanity in any sense hope to claim victory in a world that is going down to defeat? The fight is to stay human. That's the real victory. And the triumph and the trophy of that victory is nothing less than to be united after death with the eternal human form, rather than entering the darkness outside where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the way it has always been. The battle is in time, but the victory, the triumph, is not in time. It is neither an established human achievement nor any future hope. The victory is now. It is already concluded, already won. And what is a victory that's already won, if not peace? This is why Muslims greet each other with Assalamu alaikum, peace be to you. Because Assalam, peace, is a name of God. And the victory belongs to God alone. Amen. So if you're interested in those books I mentioned at the beginning, you can find them in the description of this video. We'll tell you how to get them. They're all available from Amazon. Thank you.